1937 was a portentous, pivotal, and often ominous year. It began with disastrous floods in the Ohio and Mississippi River valleys. It ended with the publication of The Hobbit and the premiere of Disney's Snow White, the first feature animated film in history. Edward VIII, having abdicated the year prior, it saw the coronation of George VI. It was the year of the Marco Polo Bridge incident and of Italian atrocities in what is now Ethiopia. The Second World War had begun already for some. It was the year in which the Holy See denounced Nazism and the Soviets alike. It was the year of the disappearance of Amelia Earhart and of the Hindenburg disaster. It was the year of the Holditch Colliery disaster in Staffordshire, which led in time to the development of the treble 9 or 911 emergency telephone system. 1937 saw numerous landmarks in music, the arts, archaeology, economic theory, linguistics, and philosophy. It was the year of Guernica in the Spanish Civil War. And on March 18, 1937, the third worst disaster in Texas history occurred. The New London School in Rusk County in East Texas exploded, wiping out a generation of young people in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, as at the last trumpet. Chesley Shaw, my great-granduncle, my father's mother's uncle, the brother of my great-grandsire, was the school superintendent. One of Uncle Chesley's sons was killed in the blast, with several other of my grandmother's cousins. This incident was recounted in my Mr. Weems' book of some years ago, 37, The Year of Portent. In memory of those lost there on March 18th, 1937, with photographs, graphic elements, effects, or other distractions from the starkness, I here retell that story briefly, based upon that passage in the book. I shall strive to do so as neutrally and evenly as is in me. I shall not, as the audio shall doubtless attest, be able to do so in one take. It is taken from Book 1, The Shadow that Events Cast Before Them, from the section The Mastery of Nature, the chapter Our Greatest Mineral Blessings. Our greatest mineral blessings: earth and water, air and fire. In the New London School, Rusk County, Texas, in March of 1937, these were the stuff of daily life. The rust-red earth and piney woods of deep East Texas stood above vast reservoirs of petroleum and natural gas. The New London Consolidated School District was, in March of 1937, the richest by repute in the United States. Oil, like gold, is a fever in the earth. Rusk County and its county town, the county seat of Henderson, had been rich before, until, in 1861, it had given of its treasure as well as of its blood the last full measure of devotion to the Confederate cause. For 6 decades after, its people, of all classes and races, had known an equality of poverty, in which even lands and crops meant nothing to money in the bank. Then Mr. Columbus M. Dad Joyner had brought in an oil well on Daisy Bradford's farm, and all was changed utterly, and a profitable bubble was born. Rusk County, like all of East Texas, had known struggle, triumph, defeat, reconstruction, and sweated, agonized rebirth. Before Mexico had cast off the Spanish yoke, the yoke that, with gathered arrows, was now the symbol of Franco's phalangists in the Spanish Civil War, Americans had begun to enter the country, its red earth and pine-clad hills familiar to Virginians and Carolinians, Tennesseans and Kentuckians, Georgians, Alabamans, and Mississippians. Cornelius Cooper had been a member of the Georgia legislature until he had offended his constituency mortally by opposing the spoliation of the Cherokee. Members of his family had married into the Cherokee Nation and were in the end to be removed to Oklahoma. He and his weary wife and many children, his slaves and livestock, and an early type of cotton gin, had wagoned across the deep South and settled in what was not yet Rusk County, in the Texas that was yet to be. After, Eatons from Tennessee had joined the small community after an upheaval in Jacksonian politics and the scandal surrounding Secretary of War Eaton's marriage to a socially unacceptable young widow. In the midst of the war between the states, the first Shaw had arrived, fleeing the occupation of New Orleans by federal forces, leaving the Confederate military hospital behind him and bringing his medical knowledge to the county adjoining the Confederate States Laboratory in Tyler, Smith County. There were Rayfords already farming and planting and cherishing dairy herds. Gaudets soon joined the rolls from Louisiana and beyond. The superintendent of the New London Independent School District in March of 1937 was the scion of these families, the scholar, educator, and administrator W.C. Shaw. Chesley Shaw, whose father had been a Confederate soldier, was one of a long line of scholarly sports who flowered unexpectedly upon the Scots rootstock of the Shaws. There had been divines and dominies, professors and poets, from Elgin in Murray to the lowlands and border, to the Chesapeake country and northern Louisiana, interspersed since the days of old Highland ballads and legendary with the usual Shaw stock of bold Scots soldiers and canny Scots merchants, Murray lairdlings, lowland civil servants to the Scots crown, and Dixie planters, medicos, and men of law. Generations of Malcolms and Gilchrists, and later Williams and Wileys, Ians and Lacklands, from Elgin to East Texas. Chesley had been the headmaster of the Rock Hill Institute in Minden, Texas, which had been authorized by Texas lawmakers to grant degrees before ever the University of Texas was founded. In March of 1937, he could survey with pardonable pride the New London School, the most advanced and modern school fabric in the nation, in the nation's richest school district, to which his own son and his nieces and nephews were sent, although the expenditure on floodlights for the football stadium, which he had opposed, yet pained his Scots soul. Riches, Rusk County knew, even those who were not thralled and thrifty Scots, such as the Shaws, were evanescent. In the midst of the Great Depression, a wise economy was a greater virtue even than commonly. In the oil fields, it was a freely accepted and acceptable course to accept for free the raw, green natural gas for which the producers had no use and charged no fee. beginning of 1937, the school board, W.C. Shaw assenting, had ended its natural gas contract and hooked the school systems to a green gas line. Earth and water, air and fire. Spain in 1937 bled, as Spain had bled so often over the centuries, the dry earth beneath the flaming skies, the wind upon the waters of Atlantic and Mediterranean. The mastery of nature was expressed in the Spain of its latest civil war, in naval clashes, air raids, bombings, and the wavering lines of battle and occupation, ground gained and lost. The nationalists under Franco and the volunteers of fascist Italy elected on the 8th of March 1937 to effect an encircling of Madrid. The Republicans made certain that the attack should come from the south. The Italians attacked from the north. The Italian order of battle was impressive. The 4th Infantry Division, consisting of the 1st and 2nd Infantry Regiments and the 3rd Artillery. The 1st and 2nd Blackshirt semi-motorized divisions, to the latter of which the 23rd of March group of Blackshirts were attached. The 3rd Blackshirt Division, an armor group composed of the 1st through 4th Tank Companies, the 1st Armored Car Company, the 1st Motorized Machine Gun Company, a 47mm anti-tank gun section, and a flamethrower company, Corps Artillery consisting of over a score of batteries, anti-aircraft elements, and an engineers section, a sapper group, the tail services, the Spanish Nationalist Division Thoria of 2 brigades with a 3rd in reserve, and the Legionary Air Force, Mussolini's version of the eminent Nazi Condor Legion. The tactics to be employed were those of the Blitzkrieg. Facing these forces in the Bering Battle of Guadalajara was the Republican 4th Corps, the 11th, 12th, and 14th Divisions, 3 indifferent brigades, and garrison troops. Earth and water, air and fire. The terrain favored the attackers, as did weight of numbers. Air and fire prevailed, rain and sleet to the fore. The mastery of nature was nature's mastery. There were 2 keys to the Republic's victory, its greatest and last. The first was that the Italians were predictably incompetent. The second was the weather, which grounded aircraft and reduced the visibility to a range at which even attackers far superior to Il Duce's would-be imperial legions, all appetite, no teeth, colonial troops and political street fighters playing at soldiers, should have failed miserably. On the 18th of March 1937, as the Republican forces counterattacked, the weather moderated, and Republican air elements made themselves felt. By the 23rd of March, it was over, not with episodes of Italian rout in the Italian retreat. The Republicans had won. So also had Franco, who had kept his troops in reserve and was perfectly content to have seen the Italians given a bloody nose. They were overweening allies at best. Earth and water, air and fire. The classical elements were coalescent upon New London, Texas. In the classroom of teacher Ann Wright, the message chalked upon the slate blackboard recognized a fundamental truth. Oil and natural gas are East Texas' greatest mineral blessings. Without them, this school would not be here, and none of us would be here learning our lessons. On the 18th of March, 1937, Chesley Shaw had a busy day before him. There had been consistent complaints of eye irritation and headache in the school building for some weeks now, and the superintendent had personally accompanied workmen as they checked against any gas leak. They had found none, but the matter was not one he was inclined to let rest. It was certainly a point to raise at the afternoon's meeting with the Parent-Teacher Association after he should have made another personal investigation during the day. The school itself, E-shaped like a Tudor manor, and roofed with the tiles of Spain, at once, like Texas itself, heir to British, American, and Spanish heritage, was filled with students at once excited and restive. The excitement and the wish to be well away arose from a single cause beyond the usual emotions of pupils. Although the 18th of March, 1937 was a Thursday, the schools of all the districts around were to meet in competition on Friday in Henderson, a combined joint sports day and academic challenge between the academies, so that this was to be the last school day of the week, the Friday being a school's holiday for the contest. A Friday atmosphere prevailed accordingly. Some fortunate students and teachers, no one yet could imagine how fortunate, left the school early on the 18th of March to ready themselves for the competition or to begin its preliminaries. The weather was unseasonably mild, adding to the torture for pupils longing to be released from classroom and study. Half a world and as many time zones away, in the Guadalajara Alcalá de Henares Pass, and over the river Tahuna that flows into the Jarama, the counterattack in the sleet had been followed by a break in the weather that allowed the Republican Air Forces to give support. The 14th Division and the 11th International Brigade, French, German, and Balkan volunteers, had thrown the Italians reeling. There had been fire and smoke, explosions and death, half a world away, wholly foreign to a school day in a small East Texas town. The 1st through 4th graders had been dismissed early at the New London School. The superintendent, Chesley Shaw, had not resolved the question of the headaches and inflamed eyes that plagued the school, but he was determined that he should do at whatever pains. His niece, Ivy, née Shaw, had married a young Missouri-born banker from Belton who had been lured away to work for an oil company. It had been how they'd met, Ivy and Val. Oil and gas were East Texas' greatest mineral blessings, after all, and they now lived in Houston. They were in time to become Mr. Pyle's Spearside grandparents. Chesley's siblings and the superintendent himself were all familiar with life in the oil fields and the dangers that accompanied it. He was not intending to let the matter rest. First, however, was the work and duty of the day. Pupils, fidgeted, were awaiting sweet dismissal, including the superintendent's niece, Dot, his nephew, J. Marvin, and his son, Clifton. His daughter, Hazel, was a teacher at the school. His nephew, Ronnie Gaudet, his son, Charles, his niece, Dot's sister, Pearl, his nephew, Arthur, his nephew, Alpheus, on a gap year from university to earn money for the next term. All were at the school or nearby. There was a cloud of witness. Shaws, old Rusk County families related and unrelated, the children of transient oil field workers. They had in common two characters. The first was, naturally, that they lived in the area and had some business with the school. The second common character of those present, pupil or parent, teacher or witness, was this: that, this being segregated Texas in 1937, all were white. The fates today were solicitous of the African American population. The PTA were meeting, having at the last moment elected to adjourn from the school auditorium to the separate gymnasium. Amongst the pupils aching to be away from the confines of school for a pleasant afternoon were William Harold Follis and his friend Junior Meadows, who had very nearly skived off school that morning to play hooky. Another pupil, Edwin Elrod, had been sternly prevented from doing just that by his older sister, also a pupil, Geneva Elrod. One of their schoolfellows, Perry Cox, had actually skived off to go and fish, but had been marched back to school by his outraged father, the town grocer, who discovered him. Bill Thompson had made the best of being stuck at school. He had exchanged seats with a girl he knew so as to be closer to a girl he was interested in. 4 of the children of the school bus driver, Lonnie Barber, were at the school as pupils. Mr. Barber was already taking the younger pupils released from class to their home. L.V. Barber and his sister Pearl were in the study hall at the furthest end of the building. Burton Barber was in the school cellars, where the applied mechanics trades shop class were taught as manual training. The youngest of the Barber children, Arden, 11 years in age, was in his last class of the day, and no doubt watching the clock as it moved glacially towards the 3:30 dismissal. At 3:17 p.m. Central Time, in the cellars of the school, the instructor of manual training, Lemmy R. Butler, switched on an electric sander. The undetected mix of escaped natural gas and ambient air that filled the cellars and basement and the walls of the school, perhaps 64,000 cubic feet in amount, exploded. The ground convulsed. The school building expanded, contracted, ribbed, and imploded, the roof having first been raised by the force of the blast, crashing back down upon the remains of the structure. The blast was heard 4 miles away. A 2-ton slab was hurled 200 feet through the air to crush a 1936 Chevrolet parked nearby. Bodies were blown upwards to fall again or to catch in telephone wires 3 stories above the ground. Pearl Barber was injured. L.V. Barber was not. Burton Barber inexplicably emerged only lightly injured from ground zero of the blast. Arden Barber was killed. Junior Meadows, Edwin Elrod, and Perry Cox were killed. Bill Thompson and his sweetheart survived. The girl who had obliged them by changing seats with Bill Thompson was killed. Hazel Shaw and the students she had removed from school early for the preliminaries of the interscholastic meet survived. Clifton Shaw, Marvin Shaw, and Doc Shaw were killed. Mrs. Wright's blackboard, with its inarguable message, was, with her classroom, buried in rubble, to be dug out as a monument of heroic irony. Lonnie Barber, witnessing the explosion as he drove, steeled himself to finish his route. Other parents' children were in his trust and must be got safely home. It was only when he had dropped his last little passenger at home that he returned to the cratered ruins where the school had so lately stood to find if any of his children had lived and to assist in the rescue of others. By that time, PTA parents, oil field workers, local residents, and bystanders were already at work, digging out rubble with their bleeding hands to rescue the living and retrieve the bodies of the dead. The sound of the blast had been its own tocsin and plea for help. Oil companies and their crews rushed to the scene with winch, tackle, and cutting torches. Many were dreading to find the bodies of their own children. Many did do. Alf and his cousins worked to dig out other cousins, the quick and the dead alike. Trucks, lorries, bread vans, and sedan cars were pressed into service as makeshift ambulances and jury-rigged hearses. President Roosevelt, from his hydrotherapy at Warm Springs, Georgia, cabled to authorize the town and the district to call upon any and all federal agencies. Governor Allred called out the National Guard to assist. Boy Scouts and members of the Emergency Conservation Work Program, the Civilian Conservation Corps in its early form, rushed to the site. Doctors, nurses, and undertakers, down to interns and trainees, raced to New London from Houston, Dallas, and Shreveport, Louisiana. In Tyler, the Sisters of the Holy Family of Nazareth canceled the scheduled grand opening of the Mother Frances Hospital. They opened it forthwith to aid the injured and the dying. The State Highway Patrol arrived to give aid, as did elements of the U.S. forces. And certain men came also whose sole nod to uniform was the star, carved from a silver peso which they bore. The Texas Rangers wear that. Gunners have sworn since the dawn of artillery, and hopeful farmers in times of drought have insisted upon believing, as no doubt those who had fought that day in the Battle of Guadalajara believed, that sufficient battery fire breaks the heavens. Certainly it seemed true at New London. For 17 ceaseless hours, in a night lit by floodlights brought in from the oil rigs, the rescuers plowed grimly on in bitter, driving rain. It was to snow before the funerals were finished. 17 unending hours later, the task was done. The site cleared, the quick and the dead alike removed from the ruins of the school fabric. Some 293 souls were lost. Of these, 24 were staff or visitors. 269 pupils were dead. A generation had been wiped away by nature's mastery in the midst of the locus classicus of man's assertion of his mastery over nature. In makeshift morgues and the local undertakers' crims, which was to bury Annie Crim, 16 years in age, killed at the school, parents, overmastered by grief, attempted to identify the bodies of children so mangled by the blast as to be all but unidentifiable. Parents fought over remains that could not be identified. Some of the killed were given names to match the faces they no longer had in death, by matching the scraps of cloth to clothes, or recognizing old injuries, or finding in a trouser's pocket the string to a favorite spinning top. Who had lived and who died was the result of merest chance. Japanese school children wrote letters of condolence. The Chancellor of the Reich cabled words of Hitlerian sympathy. Offerings in memory of the dead came from Europe and the Americas in considerable sums, or as the contents of a child's piggy bank. The Department of the Army and the Bureau of Mines began formal inquiries as grief turned to rage. The U.S. Senate held hearings. Injured in the blast and bereft of his son, Chesley Shaw now faced public obloquy and calls for lynching. A civil suit was filed and dismissed for failure to state an actionable claim against the board, the superintendent, and the gas company. The inquiries likewise cleared Uncle Chesley, and the community began numbly to forgive. Chesley never forgave himself. The family never forgave a young newspaperman from Dallas who, as Chesley was going to Clifton's funeral, doorstepped him for an interview, indeed hopped onto the running board of Chesley's car. No one in the family ever after had a good word to say of Walter Cronkite. Of the 293 killed in the blast, 112 are buried in the Pleasant Hill Cemetery between New London and Henderson, a tract of land donated in the last year of the Republic of Texas, before Texas joined the Union. There, amidst Baptists, Methodists, frontier days, and Reconstruction, tight-lipped, flinty, covenanting Presbyterians from the old Pleasant Hill Cumberland Presbyterian Church, and Anglicans whose Anglicanism was inherited from Jacobite Klansmen, are the graves of 112 young people, all of whom share a date of death, the 18th of March, 1937. And the Texas legislature passed two laws in swift response. The first set standards of education and certification for, and restricted to the certified the title and pursuit of business as engineering professionals. The second mandated the addition of odorants to natural gas, so that never again should a gas leak escape ready detection. If the mastery of nature was not completed, man in Texas could at least assert new restrictions upon nature and prove master of himself and of his fate. These are the names of the dead. Of the pupils, Boyd Abercrombie, Evelyn Adams, Almeta Faye Allman, Aileen Myrtle Anderson, Lillian Laverne Anderson, Betty Ruth Apple, Wayne S. Arnold, Ollie B. Barber, Arden Leon Barber, Donald Barrett, Edward Barrett, Pauline Barrett, Laverne T. Barton, Mervyn Barton, Margaret Louise Balkin, Laura Bell, Mary Frances Bennett, Betty Lou Benson, Nelene Bishop, John Blackerby, Neil Blackford, Virginia Rose Blanton, George A. Bonner, Onita Bonner, Byron Bolin, Sybil Del Braden, Bobby Lorene Brown, Elaine Brown, Naomi Bunting, L.R. Butler, John Robert Busby, the Bynum Boy, Owen Byron, Mary Priscilla Carney, Chloe Ann Carr, William Polk Childress, Mary Dixon Choate, Mildred Louise Clare, Mary Lynn Clark, Byron Clover, Forrest Coker, Helen Cole, Charles Rusk Collins, Jr., Kenneth Corey, Perry Lee Cox, Annie Bell Crim, Jimmy Crumley, Marcella Cummins, Zana Jo Curry, Jacqueline Knight Cuellier, Jane DeMuth, Annie Laurie Davidson, Ardith Davidson, Helen Davidson, Joe Wheeler Davidson, June Davis, Kenneth Wayne Davis, Dorothy Ann Deary, Travis Dial, Wanda Joyce Dickerson, Alice Dorsey, Ethel Dorsey, Winifred Drake, James Alfred Duncan, Vera Virginia Duncan, known as Sue Duncan. Forrest Eugene Eakes, Holly Jo Ellison, Edwin Zone Elrod, Juanita Elrod, George Emberlin, Wanda Emberlin, Doris Etheridge, James P. Feely, Jack Fentress, Jack Arnold Ford, Mary Elizabeth Ford, Mary Ellen Foreman, Emma Lloyd Francis, Margene Francis, Myrtle Freeman, Carl H. Fry, Jr., Martha Jean Gandy, Eddie Herman Gautreaux, Alan D. Garris, Alvin H. Garris, Marcelin Carroll Gibson, G.W. Gibson, R.A. Goff, Jr., Betty Catherine Gordon, Joe C. Gordon, Paul Greer, Edwin Grigg, Tom Howard Gwynn, H. D. Gunn, Doris Thurston Hale, Irene Hall, Oscar G. Hall, Jr., Carl Hamilton, Jr., Francis Hankins, Lorene Hanna, Lenita Faye Hardy, Martha Jane Hargis, Coy D. Harrelson, Helen Louise Harrelson, James Harris, Charles Hasbrook, Y. Jacqueline Hathaway, Graham K. Henson, Betty Jo Harrington, Mary Ellen Harrington, Juanita Heron, Betty Jo Hodges, Irma Elizabeth Hodges, Margreta Hogue, Bessie Estelle Holland, Betty Catherine Hollyman, Jessie Eleanor Holt, Mary Frances Houghton, Laura Lee Hauser, Imogen Hauser, Martha Ellen Hauser, Elisha M. Hudson, Herbert Hudson, Melba Hughes, Charles Porter Hunt, Ruby Frances Hunt, Maxine Jacobs, Kenneth Johnson, Geneva Lucille Jolly, Charles Goodall Jones, Fidelia Lee Jones, Helen C. Jones, Maudine Kelly, William Ketchum, Claudel Kilgore, Mary Lois King, Ernest Ray Knight, Rachel May Knotts, Bobby Lee Krause, Robert Austin Lambert, Homa Latham, W. D. Latham, Anna May Lechtenberg, Helen Lechtenberg, Florence Ruby Lee, Laura Lee, Mary Ellen LeHue, Arzell Lloyd, Mary Emily Lloyd, Virginia Lowe, Helen Charlotte Lowe, John Lumpkin, J. E. Mandry, Mazine Mandry, Doris Match, Louise Martin, Blondell Maxwell, Charles Henry Maxwell, Louise Maxwell, Evelyn Mayhew, Donald Robert McChesney, Vincent Howard McClure, Lanny McCune, Jack McGovney, James McGovney, W. C. McLaughlin, Shirley Latane McQuaid, Floyd Meadow Jr., Doris K. Milton, Arliss Ray Middleton, Carol Yvonne Miller, Sid Miller, Sarah Jane Mills, Annie Marie Milstead, Alma Monday, Desi Lomater Moore, Billy J. Moorfield, Marion Moat, Patty Ann Moat, Margie Louise Myers, Shirley Elizabeth Myers, John Wortley Nail, Mary Ethel Neal, J.D. Nelson, Aubrey Lee Nevitt, Orrin Neal Newell, Jackie Deering, Betty Moselle Norton, Vesta Allen Norton, Charles O'Neill, Raymond B. O'Neill, Marie Patterson, Joyce Payne, Lewis M. Payne, Edna Ruby Peace, Forrest LeBon Pearson, James Ray Petty, James Henry Phillips, Trillia Ruth Phillips, Virgil B. Phillips, Hazel Marie Pierce, Harvey Pinkerton, Ola Christine Platt, Edna E. Powell, Eloise Powell, Roseanne Phillips, Garland Pride, J.H. Probst, Annie Person, Gabe E. Ragsdale, Aubrey Rainwater, Evelyn Rainwater, Helen Rainwater, Dolores Ray, Curtis Burton Riggs, Ruby E. Reed, James Basil Rose, Dorothy Richardson, Betty Jane Ryder, Charles Oliver Ryder, Billy Roberts, R.B. Roberts, Holden Dean Roberts, Norma Wayne Roberts, Ruth Roberts, Annie Maxwell Rogers, Thomas Blanton Rogers, Louise Roll, Esther Faye Rucker, Robert Henry Sally, Robert Basil Sullivan, David Willard Scott, Earl Jefferson Scott, Maudine Stevens, Clifton Shaw, Dorothy Shaw, Martin Shaw, Sammy Shaw, Robert W. Shoemaker, Sammy Shoemate, Abner Smith, Bobby Jean Smith, Ida Joe Smith, Mattie Mae Smith, Naomi Jewel Smith, Ruth Willen Smith, Sam Ross Smith Jr., Anna Maud Smoot, Helen Smoot, William Edward Salve, Carl Staggs, Marshall Starks, Geraldine Stearns, Henry Lee Steele, Philo Stevens, Howard Stone, A.W. Stubblefield, Wendell Sutherland, Lawrence Swift, W.H. Tate, J.R. Tatum, Jr., Charles Ray Taylor, Marjorie Thibault, Mildred Thompson, Walter Thompson, Billy Tip, the two young Travises, Rose Van Haverbeck, Mary E. Vines, Anna Bell Wagner, Herman L. Walker, Mary Inez Walker, Maureen Walker, Louis Waller, Florine Warren, Annie Louise Watkins, Katie Mae Watson, Mary Jo Webb, Doris Wells, Dorothy Joyce White, Aubrey Williams, Doris Dean Williams, Irma Jean Williams, Lucille Willis, Mary Lou Willis, Bernice Womack, Liv Wood, Malcolm Woolley, S. Jack Wortham, Doris White, Dale May York, Moselle Young. Of teachers, parents, visitors, and others. Louise Arnold, L.R. Butler, Laura Bell, Nellie Barnes, Mrs. J.M. Gore, Mansell Hannah, Mrs. J.T. Hunt, Mary Ethel Neal, Mrs. J.D. Nelson, Marie Patterson, School Secretary, Mattie Queen Price, Music Teacher, J.H. Probst, W.H. Tate, Lizzie Mae Thompson, Louis Waller, Katie Mae Watson, Eddie Herman Gautreaux, Mrs. Billy Moore, Mrs. A.L. Walker, Eula Walker, and James Henry Phillips, aged 4 years. Remember them.